to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we're continuing our series on reading through my newsletter. I want to do a quick section today talking about how hierarchy is natural, just like cancer. So last time we did a brief tangent on Africa, and that was very, very educational, I think. And you want to come in? I have my partner. If you listen to the podcast, you'll know what she sounds like. um, you gotta come. You gotta come say hi. You look good. Dun, 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 ta-da! You look beautiful. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are continuing today for the tangent here. And let's go. Talking about hierarchy is natural, just like cancer. If you're one of those people that say good riddance to humanity, then fuck you. Sorry, not sorry. Because what makes all of this worse is that if such a thing happens, if humans go extinct or otherwise collapse, all of these lessons will be lost to the sands of time. Right? So this is kind of speaking to all the missing groups. When the next species, whether it be another hominid or some other animal, gains sentience and builds things, they too will inevitably fall prey to this cancer. Because hierarchy is logical, it is a natural adaptation in certain environments. We see this in other animals, not just in humans. That's why people assume that hierarchy is the natural state of human beings, but it's not because it's evolved, right? Like I said earlier, to be more social. But in many other animals, not all animals, granted, but in many other animals, you do see a hierarchical kind of format. So it depends on the environment in which, hierarchy becomes natural. But anyways, whenever a life form, plant, animal, bacteria, etc., escapes its natural habitat and gets into an ecosystem where it has no natural limiters, it can become cancerous, meaning grows and grows and grows. We call this an invasive species. What we've done with imperialism, colonization, goodness, and now capitalism is exactly what any other life form would do in the situation. The only difference is that we are supposedly aware of what we're doing. So if we go extinct, the same thing will happen again. The beauty of sentience is being able to actually learn and pass that knowledge to future generations. What makes humans so different from any other creature is our ability to pass on more knowledge in a variety of ways and subjects, thanks to this generational social skills. For millennia, we have been struggling with war, inequality, cycles of societal collapse, and so much more. Every single empire throughout history has collapsed, while many egalitarian societies that managed to survive the atrocities of these empires have been alive for thousands of years. Many empires, maybe even every empire, have died due to a combination of internal and external strife, due to the poor or slave class rebelling while the ruling class vie for power, and foreign powers swooping in for their own purposes. Most of their accomplishments have been lost, destroyed, or corrupted, with barely anything surviving today. Right? Just think about that. Like all the stuff we know, the Roman Empire and Greek Empire and China, the Ming, all these empires is only like a fraction of how their life actually was. Like their legacy isn't as strong as we think they are. We just have a little bit left, and that's what we constantly talk about over and over again. Meanwhile, egalitarian societies both predate and outlast these empires. The Mbuti, Khoisan, the Hausa, the Blackfoot, and more than most of us realize, have somehow existed continuously for thousands of years, despite these overpowering empires who have tried to colonize and genocide them. They are resilient. But no other animal can learn from these lessons, especially not if we go extinct. This is why I spent so much time outlining the origins of humanity and hierarchy and stuff like that. Because history shows that this is not some curse of humanity or intelligence or a necessary aspect of civilization. It's a cancer. It's a good idea, run amok. It is a runaway problem that will continue. There is nothing left. Just like cancer, it is extremely powerful. And just like cancer, just because it has power does not mean we should hold it up as better than the alternative just because it is more destructive and aggressive. When we see cancer, we know that it is fatal and must be treated as soon as possible or can be fatal. So I'm going to continue because I'm only at 5 minutes. I've been on the roll here. How to cure the cancer of hierarchy. Now, here's a transition to the solutions. If you haven't felt this coming already, current and past treatments of this problem are very much like how we treat cancer up to this point. Nuke everything and hope the cancerous cells die before the healthy ones. Now, obviously, that is not ideal, but it's the best we could do for quite a while. People ate the rich, had violent uprisings, and hoped to destroy power structures before the society itself collapsed. Right? That's what rebellions are, revolutions. They're essentially the nuke. What I mean by nuke is if you don't know, in order to at least before the last couple of years, in order to treat cancer, they would bombard you with nuclear, with basically nukes, with radiation and things like that to try to kill off the cancerous cells. Now, nowadays, it's more targeted and more specific and everything like that. So it's more surgical, right? It's better with less side effects than we had before. But that's kind of proves my point here, right? Just look at how we cure cancer in real life. Think about that in terms of our society, right? What if we're more surgical with how we deal with hierarchy and power and things like that? But let's continue. But just like with cancer, that puts you in a position where you have to delicately balance the violent energy or risk it getting out of hand and causing even more problems. Furthermore, even if it succeeds, you don't actually know if you pulled up the cancerous cells at the stem. You hope it's in remission and never comes back, but it often does. Why is that? Just like with cancer, hierarchy can turn even good things into bad. The specifics as to why or how this corruption happens is still not clear. But we know that environmental conditions, genetic mutations, and even epigenetic mutations due to pollution or disease can cause cancer. So I should have been a little bit more clear here with my metaphors. But essentially, I'm saying that we don't exactly know the specifics as to why how it happens. Similarly to how we don't know the specifics as to how hierarchy happens, like how the um, corruption of hierarchy and things like that happens. But we know that there's a lot of these. We know a lot of the conditions that create it, right? We might not know the specifics, but we know a lot of the generals, and we know more and more of the specifics. Oh, Colin B, welcome to the chat. He says they say straight facts. So yeah, appreciate it. Um, that's what I'm trying to what I'm trying to drop here. Similarly, a hierarchy could start from something benign and helpful, like a good leader, a protection force from danger, a way to distribute limited resources, right? It's logical, it makes sense. But the environmental conditions, such as patrilocal or antisocial societies and resource hoarding, that's a big one, mutation of the culture it inherited, such as irrelevant traditions and toxic cultures, or epigenetic mutations of the culture in the present, such as new technologies or ideas that lead to more pollution and inequality rather than sustainability, can naturally turn that hierarchy into something terrible. So again, I probably should have broke this down a little bit more. But what I'm saying here, I'm drawing these same conclusions or the same methods that we know causes cancer in real life. Like we know that environmental conditions and genetic mutations and epigenetic mutations, cause cancer, and they do so through different mechanisms. And so I'm drawing parallels here with the environmental conditions, such as how we create our societies with the cultures that we have and stuff like that. The mutation of culture and inherited, which is your genetic mutations, right? Genetic mutations are things that happen across like a um, during reproduction, essentially, right? When one generation goes to the next, when your cells are splitting and doing mitosis, meiosis, and all that sort of stuff, that's a prime spot for mutations to happen. But that's different than epigenetic mutations. Epigenetic mutations happens in your own lifetime. So, say for instance, you get into an accident or get bombarded with some nuclear, thing, or some type of radiation, or if you have some pollution in the environment, that can actually poison your cells and cause mutations to happen, and therefore cause cancer, right? Such as this is how a lot of breast cancer happens. It's epigenetic rather than genetic. Like, you don't inherit it, but you can gain it. So I'm drawing these parallels here with our life, right? Right. So we can inherit culture through generations, and during the inheritance, right, during that splitting of the culture and creating a new generation of the culture, mutations can happen, right? That it can spread all out of whack. Another example is epigenetics mutation of the culture. So in in a single generation, you can introduce a new factor, such as technology, right? Such as new technology, I should say, and that new technology can create all sorts of conditions or all sorts of problems and mutations, some good but some bad, right? So if that mutation, if that thing that the technology introduced, such as more pollution, right, or more inequality, then it creates the conditions for this cancer of hierarchy. So yeah, just to clarify that up. Anyways, before we know it, we are being bored alive in the soup of egomania, collecting more and more power, warring with other peoples, destroying the environment, and generally becoming a parasitic life form rather than a symbiotic one. So we're not parasitic by default. A lot of the misanthropes would love to say, "Oh, we're humans are parasites," but no, we're not. Like, we can be as symbiotic, or as anything else, even more symbiotic than most other creatures. Right? The fact that we can, grow a plant. I have a plant, right here in my room, like, that would never be able to grow on its own in this environment, but I'm able to take a plant that usually grows somewhere around the world, and I can grow it right here in my room. I can plant it in the backyard. Like, we have all these sorts of mechanisms to create more life than would naturally happen. So we are very symbiotic. Maybe the specifics change, but the general shape of this cycle will and has repeated when any other life forms that escapes its natural habitat. Humans, for hundreds of thousands of years, were able to combat or avoid the carcinogen that is hierarchical power and unchecked growth by limiting our growth through natural means. Here are some examples. They had voluntary abortions, not to control population numbers, but to dedicate more time to actually raising every child as best as they could. That's what people don't understand about, like, hunter gatherer cultures and stuff like that, is that the reason that they were so underpopulated or whatever is because they actually decided to spend more time with each children. Like, they would only have a child every 4 years at least, right? So they can make sure that they can dedicate all their time of the entire community for every child that they raise, versus during agriculture they would just be popping kids out, right? And that's why the mortality rate for children would actually lower, even though it was already bad back then, because they had no medicines and all this other stuff when a kid got sick. But in the early stages of agriculture, which is just first 1,000 to 3,000 years, right? You had a huge amount of child mortality, right? But they had more children. You had 10 children, five of them or eight of them died, but two left over. Versus a hunter-gatherer life, who would maybe have 4 children, but two of them died, and so you had, 2 children, but you have less people in the hunter-gatherer culture. You had, like, up to 50 people, while in a farming city you had, hundreds of people, right? So you begin to see why agriculture outpopulated hunter-gatherers and stuff like that. Colin B says, I think we could see that kind of epigenetic mutations with how young people these days know more than adults often. For thousands of years it has been the other way around, but the pace of tech progress changed that. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's a great, insight there, right? The fact that me today, I, like, know more than my parents, and I knew more than my parents, like, back in like elementary school or something like that, about specific, maybe obviously not about everything, but about a lot of things. And that's because, not because I'm super smart or anything like that, but because you and I, we had, the internet growing up, or we had TV growing up. We had, even education that was able to teach us more stuff. Maybe they didn't teach us the key stuff like how to pay your taxes, but we still learned a lot of stuff, right? But the parents, they may not be comfortable with that, right? When you have a child that says they know more than you, or they'd be like, "Oh no, you don't know anything. All you know is book stuff, right? You don't know what real life is." But if they value, what you were learning as you were growing up, you'll be able to come, to a kind of combination there. But unfortunately, with a lot of cultures, they don't really listen to what the children are learning. You just kind of throw them in school and expect them to shut up. So, but yeah, I like that thing there, and it's getting more and more, apparent as time goes on. Where was I? Yeah, as best they could. The children were not raised or belonged to the parents alone, but by the entire community. Their aunts and uncles and grandparents and elders and neighbors, even peers, would all play a role in the upbringing of the children, such that kids were naturally both independent and social. They lived in adaptive communities that were small and mobile during some of the times of the year, but also came together in other times of the year. The first cities were temporary, right? Go look at Global Atepi and all these other cities, right? They were actually seasonal. They were based on, these hunter gatherer cultures all coming together across the region to have a huge gift exchange ceremony and live in that same place for a specific period of time. They knew the power of coalitions and reverse dominance tactics to create and maintain true freedom. That is, the freedom to decide how you want to live your life, of each individual rather than biasing the freedoms of a few over others. These communities utilized smart immune systems that looked out for any egomaniacs and then isolated, disincentivized, or ostracized that sort of behavior. The very creation of communities was as a natural defense against dominant alpha males, where a coalition of females and beta males could more easily and fairly get their share of resources by banding together to defend from dominant aggressive types. Right? So I mentioned that earlier on. We humans are really weird in terms of mammals. Most mammals, the male is 100 to 150, even 200% bigger than a female. That's because they are able to use dominance tactics to get their way with the female. But males, we're only what, 15 to 30% at most bigger, but usually around 15 to 20% bigger. So that shows you that we were not able to use dominance tactics most of the time. They viewed themselves as a part of nature holistically, such that any consumption was inherently sustainable. They knew that you couldn't keep taking from an environment forever. You would have to move on eventually or try new things in order for the old things to replenish themselves. Thus, technologies were not created to extract more at the cost of the environment, but instead to cause less suffering, either on the part of the animal, the plant you were killing, or the human who did the work, and less waste. And you see so many examples of this technology. Like today, we have a very skewed idea of technology. We kind of think technology is just computer stuff. But no, technology is literally anything that allows you to improve your life, that allows you to innovate, that allows you to use tools or something like that, right? Language is a technology. Fire is clothes is a technology, right? So when hunter gatherers invented spears and all that other stuff, what you actually notice is that you have a progression of the type of weaponry they used. At first, it was spears, that were able to, that were very blunt. But then they used sharper weapons because it killed the animal faster so the animal suffered less. And when the animal suffers less, the meat actually tastes better, right? Because it's less tension in the animal and stuff like that. And they have a lot of these examples. Throughout many of these different cultures of using technologies that were less dangerous, not dangerous, but like more efficient, I should say, at doing what they were doing. But it was all centered around sustainability as opposed to where we are today with technology, which is just about extraction, 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 and rarely ever thinks about replenishment. Even spiritual beliefs were more sustainable. This is a huge one. The gods and spirits were rarely ever all powerful beings, and that you had to prostrate and or kill for in order. The gods and spirits were rarely ever all powerful beings that you had to prostrate and or kill for in order to get their blessing. Instead, the gods and spirits were each powerful in their own domain. The deer god was more powerful in one domain, while the lion god in another, for instance. The trickster god was a wily fellow, but you could outwit them if you were clever too. Any and everybody could partake in rituals. They were not controlled or restricted to only the holiest people. Thus, there was never any need or thought to go to war for conflicting messages from the gods, or because God told me to take this land. Spirituality was a truly tolerant and open minded shared experience of trying to appreciate and understand the mysteries of the universe, right? And you see this with the beginnings of astrology and astronomy, where people were looking at the stars all day. Because and back then, when we didn't have light pollution, every night you'd be able to see this beautiful cosmic night sky. It's so beautiful. Like I wish I could see it in real life, but go look up pictures of the night sky. You get able to see like the Milky Way, and it's just really beautiful. The fact that we most of us today don't get to see that sky is really concerning. But nonetheless, these spiritualities came up because everybody experienced it. Now, I'm not sure if I go into in this newsletter, but they also would practice things like psychedelics because anybody could take a trip, right? They would trip through the spiritual realm and discover all these things and have these amazing experiences. And humans have been doing that for a long time, even before we were humans. They were able to see that other hominids, most likely were tripping on mushrooms or these other things, right? Beer and uh other kind of drugs and stuff like that have been created by humans for a very very long time, because it changed your mental state and allowed you to explore things and discover this spiritual realm, or this realm beyond yourself. And we very much lost that when we created organized religion, because that created a hierarchy where only certain people could experience things, and then they would dictate that to everybody else. So hierarchy really destroyed our spiritual journeys. There are so many ways in which people actively and passively fought against the egocentricity that is endemic to hierarchies. They weren't naively doing these things listed above. Many societies witnessed firsthand the evils of hierarchy and thereafter did their best to spread the knowledge and or otherwise take down any future hierarchies. And I was thinking about here, the Native Americans who would I think they were across like the Western California, but most of America, where they would actually fight the other hierarchical Native Americans, right? There were Native Americans that were trying to build empires, and then there were other ones that would constantly fight them and stop them from partaking in slave trade and stuff like that. So, if you got this far, let's finally look into how we can use those wisdoms of indigenous peoples, as well as learning from our own mistakes to build a better, more sustainable future. We'll get into that next time. Unfortunately, it's probably gonna be next week because I'm going out of town in the next couple of days. But as always, you can always go, read this if you really want to read it now. But yeah, thanks as always for watching and for listening. Sorry again, it's at 20 minutes. I just can't help myself talking about so many other details when it comes to this stuff. It's very interesting to me. Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you learned or agree with or disagree with. We can always have a discussion about stuff. I'm always open to this stuff as long as it's sensible. Don't come up with no bullshit. Like, come with the facts, and then we can have a discussion. But yeah. Thanks as always for watching, and hope you learned something and keep changing. Try to change the world. Go learn something new. Ask questions. Be curious. Be critical. And yeah, that's it. See ya. Bye bye.